supposed to be, according to Richard Chase in his notes that he looked, the oldest story, haunted house story in America. It's like one of the first ones that probably came over from Europe and was changed in different ways and made into a real, genuine American story. So I'll tell that for you now. Because not only is it the first haunted house story in America, it's the first one I ever told. One time there was a preacher, and he wanted to see if he could banish a ghost from a house in his settlement. This house had been haunted about 10 years, and several people tried to stay there all night because, you know, if you stay all night in a haunted house, it gets rid of that haunting spirit. Well, several people, man, woman, children, families, had tried, but all had been scared out by the ghost around midnight. Well, this preacher was a brave man. He said, yes, I'll do it. And he went on up to that house with his Bible in his hand. He went on in, and you can picture what that haunted house looked like. It was gray, and the windows were broken out, and the door was off the hinges. And actually, when he pushed the door open, it was colder inside than it was outside. But he went in anyway, and he saw a huge fireplace, and there was some kindling and some newspapers, and he had some matches, and so he built himself a fire, found a big log. And pretty soon he had this big fire going in the fireplace, and he moved a chair close to it, and he opened up his Bible, and he started to read. He didn't have any trouble at all, just reading his Bible, until just before midnight, when he heard something in the cellar, going back and forth, and back and forth, and back. And then there's something started to scream and get choked off, and there's a lot of thrashing around and struggling. And finally everything got quiet again. Well, I told you this preacher was a brave man. Anybody else would be out of that house in 2 seconds flat. But he sat right back down, he opened up his Bible, and he started to read again. But he didn't get more than 2 sentences read before he heard that thing starting up the cellar stairs. Step, 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 till it was right outside the cellar door. Well, then that preacher, he did get scared, and he stood up, and he held his Bible out in front of him. The knob turned slowly, and the door opened wide. And that preacher, he said in a quiet voice, "Who are you? What is it you want?" Well, the ghost came right across the room, straight up to him, took hold of his coat lapels. It turned out to be a young woman about 20 years old. She smelled earthy. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face so he could see bones and part of her teeth. She didn't have no eyeballs, but there was a kind of a blue light way back in her eye sockets. And she had no nose to her face. Well, then she started talking. Sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing through it. Told him how her friend had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. Said if he'd dig up her bones and give her a Christian burial, she could rest. But then she told him not to bury all the bones. She told him to keep the end joint of the little finger of the left hand, just this little piece of bone right here. When he found it, he was to hold on to it till the next church meeting and put it in the collection plate. And if anybody touched that finger bone who was guilty of the murder, you'd find out. And if you come back here once more, after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church. And the ghost sobbed like it was tired and sank right down through the cellar floor. What else could that preacher do? He was terrified by this time, but he knew he had to obey the ghost. He had to do what the ghost told him to do. And so he found an oil lamp with a little bit of oil left in it, and he lit it by the flame from the fireplace. And he held it out just like this. And he started walking down the stairs, down those dark stairs, lighting only just a little patch as he went. And when he got down, he looked around and he saw bones flung all over the cellar. They were in every corner, and it took him all night, all the rest of the night, to gather up all those bones. It was dawn when he came up those stairs with those bones. And he took them right to the cemetery by the church, and he dug the grave himself. And he put her in the grave, and he prayed over her bones and her grave. But he didn't bury all the bones. He kept the end joint of the little finger, the left hand, just this piece. It took him a long time to find it, but when he did, he held on to it until the next church meeting. And that Sunday, when no one was looking, he put that finger bone in the church collection. And then he went out as usual to give his sermon, and they sang their song, and he sat back, and he looked at everybody in the church, and the collection plate was being passed up and down the aisles. He looked at each person who put his hand in that collection plate, and sure enough, when a certain man put his hand in that collection plate and touched that finger bone, it stuck to his hand. He rubbed and scraped and tore at that bone trying to get it off. He went to screaming like he was going crazy. And then they dragged him up to the front of the church right before the preacher. And he confessed the murder. He was taken off and tried and hung with that finger bone still stuck on his hand. Never did come off. But the preacher did go back to that house one midnight. Didn't see the ghost, but the ghost's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock by the fireplace. He did. He found a big sack full of gold and silver money. And he brought it to the church. And nobody ever heard tell of that ghost anymore. But the print of those bony fingers, when a ghost took hold of his coat lapels, was burnt right into the cloth. And that never did come out either. And that's the story of the haunted house.